we recognize that it is a Monday morning and that there are several other things that you could have been doing with your time. But we're glad that you chose to give us this time, and we would try to make the best of it so everyone lives here with some value added to their knowledge and their efforts to make a better country for all of us. My name is Oke Apia. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Orderpaper Nigeria, and it is my delight to anchor this session. This is, as you already know, a virtual meeting. You just got the notification that it is being recorded, just for the sake of it. It is being recorded for several other purposes. If you're able to keep your camera on, that would be great. If you're not able to, it's fine. If the bandwidth does not allow you to keep your camera on, that's also all right. You know, the audio is more important in the recording. Enjoy you to keep your audio muted until invited to speak. If you are really pressed to make a comment or share a perspective or an insight or a reference for that matter, you may use the chat box until we get to Q&A where we can invite audience participation. We intend not to spend more than 90 minutes, and we'll be very glad to receive your cooperation in that regard. And so, yes, we'll get started. I would like to acknowledge and recognize our speakers. And just for the sake of it, just to be sure, since we're all muted, just to be sure I'm not talking to myself, if you can engage the reactions, the buttons, the emojis, just to, you know, give a clap, you know, share an emoji, you know, show some love or something, just pop up so we can know that you can hear me loud and clear and I'm not talking to myself, you know. That'll be great. You know, so yes, this meeting is very, very important, and we have had the pleasure of very, very dignified and distinguished guests joining us today, both as participants. Thank you very much for that show of hand, for that thumbs up. Thank you. This meeting would be resourced by very distinguished Nigerians from different walks of life, you know, and without much ado, I'll just take the pleasure to introduce them and invite them as appropriate. We have speakers that will be resourcing this meeting. First on the list, on our list today is Honorable Terseer Ugbor. Honorable Ugbor, I must please seek your permission ahead of time, just in case I'm not getting the pronunciation right. You know, Honorable Terseer Ugbor is the Deputy Chairman of the House of Representatives Committee on the Environment. As you would see on the screen, you know, and when he begins to speak, Honorable Ugbor's got a very versatile and impressive experience, both in the private sector and in the non-profit sector. And all of this are substantially around the renewable energy industry before he became a member of parliament. It's the first time in the House of Representatives. But I can tell you from our work at Orderpaper that is one of the more intellectual, intentional, and respected member of the 10th House of Representatives. Honorable Ugbor, you're welcome to this meeting. Yes, just a thumbs up would indicate that you have heard us loud and clear. I saw you just made a comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I can hear you loud and clear.
Welcome, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next on our list, by no means less respected and less dignified, is Dr. Nkiruka Maduekwe. Dr. Maduekwe is the Director General of the National Council on Climate Change, NCCC. You would also see from our profile that will be displayed that she's come packed with lots of experience, you know, exposure. She's been this and she's been that. But I can just tell you for summary that she's got a rich profile in climate change jurisprudence and legal expertise, you know, that have been tested both nationally and globally. However, she will be represented in this meeting for now by the head of legal of the council, Awele Ikobe Anyali. Please do indicate that you are in by a show of the hand or something, and thank you. Please, if you don't mind, my dear audience, if you can also just give a clap, a virtual clap to our guest speakers, that would be greatly appreciated. The next on the list is Dr. Dita
Thank you.
Bassi.
Good
Thank you.
morning, Mr. Epia. I'm here with you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really good to have you here. Next on the list is Dr. Dita Bassi, who is the Director of Policy Planning and Strategy of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Dr. Bassi comes packed with a lot of technical experience. He was one-time Director Technical of Neiti, and is currently the Director of PPS, where he marshals the energy transition work of that very important national agency. Dr. Bassi, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nice being here with you.
Great. Next on the list, of course, by no means less significant order, is Mr. Olumide Idowu. Mr. Idowu is the founder, executive director of the International Climate Change Development Initiative, ICCDI Africa. He is a recognized advocate on climate change and, of course, a youth mobilizer around issues relating to energy transition, climate change generally, and all of that. Mr. Idowu, thank you and glad to have you here. Yes, thank you very much. I would acknowledge before inviting him to speak, but let me acknowledge, very important, the Executive Secretary of Neiti, Dr. Orji Ogbonaya Orji, whom I will invite to speak in a short bit. Dr. Orji is a very formidable backbone of this effort, both personally and as, of course, the Executive Secretary of Neiti. I will tell you a bit about that shortly. But to proceed with the meeting, can I just tell you a bit about the Rembinars? The Rembinar Dialogue Series is a collaborative initiative of Orderpaper Nigeria and Neiti, convened to foster topical discussions on broad resource governance issues that aim to advance fiscal reforms, transparency, and accountability within Nigeria's extractive sector and the unfolding energy transition. The Rembinars are designed to attract participation from a wide range of stakeholders with mandates and interest in fiscal governance, extractive transparency, and public finance management. We had the inaugural edition of this series focused on tax base and implications for Neiti audits on the 3rd of March 2025. That edition provided a comprehensive assessment of how the proposed tax reforms, of course, there are 4 tax bills currently, being processed in the National Assembly, impact Neiti's audit processes, including compliance mechanisms and overall revenue transparency across the extractive sector. The session had over 100 participants who came in from different sectors, including the public, private, and civil society sectors. We had very interesting and erudite panelists, speakers, ranging from Dr. Orji himself. We had Malam Aruna Yahaya, who is a member of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. And of course, we had Dr. Michael Uzoigwe, a renowned and respected policy expert on natural resource governance and former country manager for Anglophone and Lusophone Africa at the EITI, that's the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, based in Oslo, Norway. So at this point, we'll get the ball rolling by inviting, I have mentioned that the Rembinar series are a collaboration between Orderpaper and Neiti. And we are not unmindful. We continue to express our gratitude to Neiti for the collaboration we've received, not just on this Rembinar and RemTrack, but also on several initiatives that we have jointly designed and implemented. So without much ado, let me distinguish, ladies and gentlemen, introduce and welcome the Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, Dr. Orji Ogbonaya Orji, to give us a welcome remark and open this meeting for discussions. Dr. Orji, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this meeting. I would like to welcome the distinguished members of the panel, my sister Nkiruka Maduekwe, who is heading the Energy Transition Office, and all the distinguished members of the panel, all protocols observed. I would like to welcome all of you once again to the second edition of the Rembinar Dialogue Series, which is, as already explained, a collaborative effort between Neiti and Orderpaper, a very leading non-governmental organization, civil society organization, and their key partner in this process. The Rembinar Dialogue Series was conceived as a platform to foster meaningful engagement on issues of resource governance, fiscal transparency, and accountability in the oil, gas, and mining sector. Today's dialogue is centered mainly on tax bills and their implications on energy transition, a topic we believe is appropriate and both timely and critical at this moment. As Nigeria charts its path from fossil fuel-dependent economy towards renewable energy, tax policy will play a very central role in shaping the success of our energy transition process and agenda, by extension, and our sustainable development ambitions in general. The success of Nigeria's energy transition plan, particularly in scaling renewable energy, promoting green finance, and instituting carbon pricing, will significantly depend on the design and effective implementation of our tax policies and tax laws. The recent tax reforms, including the Finance Acts and recommendations from the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, aimed at streamlining the fiscal environment, is a welcome development. And this is why Neiti had publicly endorsed these major and bold reforms. However, there are still some underlying questions that need to be tackled, answered, and examined as we try to proceed ahead. One of those questions will be, how do we intend to navigate the complex realities that lie ahead? Do these reforms accelerate our shift to a clean energy, or do they anchor us more firmly on where we are, fossil-dependent model? It's very important that we have a kind of clarity within this framework. Energy transition represents a global shift from fossil fuel to renewable sources. That is not a debate. For Nigeria, a country heavily dependent and reliant on oil revenues, this transformation demands a very careful and sustained reforms within the extractive sector that lays the golden egg. And that is why Neiti, in line with the Global Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative and with support from Ford Foundation, is currently conducting a study that will lay all the facts and critical facts and figures and the data bare for public interrogation. Our study on the impact of energy transition, the impact, the damage, and the cost. What will be the opportunities? What will be the risks? We need to understand this before we jump into the moving bus from where we are. And that's why we can't wait to have that study, which will be concluded and made public between now and August. By next week, our National Stakeholders Working Group will be meeting in Umuahia, the capital city of Abia State, to take a second look and in depth to be properly briefed and take a look at how far the study has gone and be able to make their own input. Our mandate includes exposing tax policymakers to viable options that minimize risks and maximize opportunities that are associated with energy transition. And this study will play a very important role. A core part of this commitment is providing credible data and analysis to support sound, evidence-based policy decisions. Neiti is supported with a lot of viable data. But how we are able to humanize and interpret this data to help us make informed decisions is still another stage in our engagement. Historically, Nigeria's tax restructure has leaned heavily in favor of our sector, the extractive industries. That's how you begin to hear of tax holidays, pioneer status incentives, subsidy payments, and also other largely heavily considered benefit opportunities in the oil, gas, and mining operators. While renewable energy developers continue to face hurdles such as VAT VAT components, import duties on solar panels, and absence of clear fiscal relief pathways. Without a robust and targeted tax incentives, renewable energy projects struggle to compete, and Nigeria is missing out on billions in private capital that could power rural communities, support local green manufacturing, and reduce emissions. At present, critical measures are missing from our fiscal proposals, including VAT exemptions on renewable energy components, tax credits for clean energy investments, and accelerated depreciation allowances for green technologies. There are globally proven tools that Nigeria must urgently institutionalize. With Nigeria's Green Bond Program, while Nigeria's Green Bond Program is a commendable start, it requires stronger fiscal support. Imagine if investors in certified green bonds receive tax breaks or reduced withholding tax rates. It could unlock a floodgate of climate-aligned investments, which it will impact livelihoods and create more jobs. Equally important is the establishment of a national carbon pricing mechanism. Embedding the environmental costs of emissions within our fiscal framework will not only raise much needed revenue, but also incentivize cleaner industrial prices, aligning tax policies with our 2060 net zero emission ambition. And to achieve this, Nigeria needs to do certain steps. One is to introduce targeted incentives for renewables, energy efficiency, and energy storage technologies. Develop a comprehensive green fiscal framework anchored in transparency and accountability. Relocate fossil fuel subsidies to support off-grid renewable energy solutions. We can learn valuable lessons from global experiences. Countries like Canada and Netherlands offer investment tax credits and have robust carbon pricing systems. And closer home, South Africa just introduced a carbon tax. South Africa just renewed or reinvigorated its tax, carbon tax, which began in 2019, and has channeled all the profits into clean energy development. Nigeria needs to design and implement similar cost-specific strategies, and the time to do this has come. Furthermore, our fiscal system must move beyond supporting legacy energy systems. A comparative analysis reveals a clear mismatch. The extractive sector continues to enjoy preferential fiscal treatment over the renewable sector. This imbalance must be urgently corrected if we are to create a competitive, sustainable, investor-friendly energy market. Now, tax certainty, transparency, and predictability are very, very critical in discussing this subject because of its potential to attract foreign direct investment. Clear, coherent incentives for clean energy will send a very strong signal to global investors that Nigeria is fully committed to a greater sustainable energy future. Ladies and gentlemen, taxation is more than an economic tool. It's a declaration of our national priorities. We are truly committed as an agency to working with partners, Orderpaper, civil society organizations, ministries, departments, and agencies, international development partners, and the industry, the oil and gas mining sector, to create a sustainable energy sector where our tax policies must unequivocally reflect that commitment. As we engage in today's deliberations, let us move from rhetoric to reform, from fossil dependency to a green future, and from burdensome legacies to boundless opportunities that exist in this ongoing international and national debate. Together, let us work to ensure that Nigeria's tax framework becomes a catalyst, not a constraint, in our journey toward a clean, secure, and inclusive energy future. On this note, I'd like to welcome you once more to this Rembinar, the second series, and I'm reaffirming Nigeria's Neiti's commitment to this ongoing dialogue through this very viable platform. And I encourage you to speak loudly, ask questions, inform questions, and engage this process while it lasts. Once again, I welcome you and I have the opportunity to declare the Rembinar open. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Orji, for that erudite and eloquent opening remark that very much lays the foundation for the experts' interventions by our panel of speakers. Just before I invite them, let me just anchor correct, the conversations that we're having further contextualizes. We know that there are tax bills, 4 tax bills that are being processed by the National Assembly. The House of Representatives passed all 4 tax bills just before the recess that they are currently on. So when they resume, the expectation is that the Senate would concur. And then very quickly, I think, the president would look at them and probably assent to the 4 tax bills that would greatly revolutionize the fiscal framework of this country, and redirect not just investment, but production, and even consumption, if you like, So these tax bills, as we have them, and if we become laws, they have clear intersection with Nigeria's energy sector, including, of course, the energy transition. And when you talk about the energy transition, there are certain roadmaps that we are already looking at, roadmaps and ambitions, set by governments, and the Climate Change Act 2021, the energy transition policies, and several other, statutes and frameworks, legislations and delegated legislations clearly provide the ambitions that Nigeria is, looking to achieve on our path to net zero. Briefly, these are, a time frame of 2060 to achieve net zero. We're looking to achieve this by increasing renewable electricity to 23% by 2025 and 36% by 2030. We're looking to have 30 million homes in the country have access to clean cooking, and energizing agriculture, textile production, and storage, of course, using gas as a transition, fuel. We're also looking to electrify 5 million households with solar electricity solutions. So these are the ambitions. These are the goals we want to achieve, and the tax reforms, must have a way to align these ambitions. The changes we want to see in the fiscal framework must be aligned. Otherwise, will have to suffer not just policy inconsistency, but policy misalignment. And this is the essence of this conversation. That's why, of course, very glad to have a mixture of guests, who are speaking from different perspectives. And without much ado, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me invite Honorable Ugbor to the microphone. You are a member of the National Assembly. I have just mentioned the House of Representatives has passed all 4 bills. Before you speak to the specificity of the tax bills and the energy transition, could you just preface that? Yes, let me ask that question, but could you preface that with an overview of the legislative governance of Nigeria's energy sector, especially the energy transition generally as we have it? Then you can, of course, expand on what the specific items or the specific ambitions that the tax bills seek to realize as you have passed them in the House. Honorable Ugbor, please.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for having me share some insight into what we've been doing in the National Assembly, especially in the House of Representatives regarding the 4 tax reform bills that you have just laid out. Generally speaking, the whole concept of the tax reforms, was to basically change the way tax administration is done in Nigeria in a way that impacts positively on revenue mobilization, livelihoods of our citizenry, job creation, and economic development. The reforms generally seek a unified tax administration system across Nigeria, so across the sub-regionals and states, local governments, and of course the federal government. However, there must be a transition period where states and local governments and the federal government move collectively and gradually towards the new tax system that is being introduced by these reforms and the bills that have been passed in the House of Representatives. But it is good to also know that there are several agencies of government who are tasked with the responsibility for energy transition, for renewable energy adoption in Nigeria. Of course, the Energy Commission of Nigeria, the Renewable Energy, the Rural Electrification Agency, and others who are specifically tasked with this responsibility to advance Nigeria's energy transition. Of course, of recent, we have the National Council on Climate Change, who is now the lead in ensuring that policy frameworks are implemented for improved renewable energy adoption for the purpose of fighting climate change and its impacts on our communities. But I would like to just say that there are several ways that Nigeria can tackle its tax reforms or can include energy transition in its tax reform systems, specifically green tax. I remember a few years ago under the previous administration, there was a green tax that was introduced by the previous administration. It came in form of an executive order for green tax to be introduced in our in our tax laws. But that was not implemented, and eventually it was repealed or it was withdrawn by the current administration in the process of developing and designing the current tax reform bills that we have on the table today. But overall, green tax is the way to go for promoting for the energy transition that we are seeking to achieve in Nigeria, basically system in the country. And of course, green taxes cover things like energy taxes, transport taxes, pollution taxes, natural resource taxes, and what have you. And all these taxes seek to incentivize the renewable energy sector in Nigeria. I just read recently on the indoor panel, solar panels in Nigeria, and including, of course, the energy storage component of it, which has to do with batteries and things like that. This is one of the ways that I guess the Nigerian government seeks to incentivize local production and look at local manufacturing of renewable energy components in Nigeria. One of the benefits of that will be, of course, to create jobs in Nigeria, to improve technology here, to ensure technology transfer from Europe and from China and from all over the world where we import renewable energy components.
Hello, Honorable Bo. Hello? He does seem to have stopped talking, Honorable Ugbor. Yeah, it is. The honorable gentleman appears to have been interrupted in his presentation. We would welcome him back to continue his presentation when he returns. But let's move the conversation forward while we await his return. Let me come to you, Dr. Bassi. From your experience and from what you have seen about the tax reform bills, what role do you think Neiti should be playing? But before I go there, let me ask you this one first. Which aspects of the energy sector are likely to be most impacted by the proposed tax reforms? Maybe in terms of compliance and the energy transition, investment generally, from perspectives, which aspects of the sector, the energy sector, please? Dr. Bassi.
Thank you very much. Okay, once again, thank you for having me here. I think this conversation as relates to energy transition is something that we ought to have. It's a good time that we're starting this conversation because there's a clear alignment between our energy transition goal and then the Finance Act. First and foremost, we need to understand that Nigeria as a country is an oil-dependent country in terms of our resources. Whilst we're looking at energy transition, the fact remains that we're still an oil and gas country. And we need to look at it in that perspective because 80 to 90% of our revenue comes from the oil and gas sector. And transiting to an energy transition must be done in a way that will not impact our economy. And that's why the ES had said that using the Ford Foundation, we're trying to look at what is the economic implication of the energy transition. Because when you look at the indices, we intend to achieve a net zero emission by 2060. We need to increase our efficiency, energy renewable by 23% by 2025. By 23% 25 to like 36% in 2030. We need to give 30 million homes access to clean cooking gas and energize agriculture. And then we provide electricity for 5 million households. As it is now, we are in deficit of all of these things. For energy, I think we're in deficit. We're a country that's energy poor because up to now, there are still homes that have less than 12 hours of electricity, even in urban areas. So we need to also have that alignment. The Finance Act that came into play, that is being proposed, the 2023 Finance Act, is a welcome legislation for us. Because the bill wants to harmonize tax collection. For us in EITI, when we look at the tax collection, we see that tax collection coming from agencies of government that initially the regulators were collecting some of these revenues. We have the NUPRC for oil and gas and setting as and then NDPRA. And then for the solid mineral sector, we have the Ministry of Mines through the Mines Inspectorate Department that receives revenue. But this will be consolidated under one revenue agency. We looked at the bill. Like ES highlighted, there are some alignment with the energy transition goal that we have. One, the area of alignment includes tax incentive for renewables. The Finance Act 2023 exempt renewable energy equipment from VAT and custom duties, such as solar panels and wind turbines and other sources of energy generation. But when you look at that critically also, you find that Nigeria is blessed with abundant resources of minerals that are used for transition minerals in terms of lithium and other rare earth minerals. Incentives should be in place whereby we can be able to develop this one in country and have development of solar panels. The in thing, because you can generate electricity, but transmission of electricity, the renewable, is that you need to store it, having effective mechanism of storing it, even if generated from solar or any of the renewable pathways. Achieving that means that we must have a way of having local capacity of developing our batteries in country and discourage the exploitation of raw mineral resources such as lithium. Another aspect is that gas has been looked at as the transition mineral. Gas utilization incentives has also been incorporated into that. The Act promotes gas as a transition fuel by offering tax breaks to compressed natural gas and liquefied natural gas projects. I think this should be explored more in terms of the implementation. This is something that will, because as a country, Nigeria is richly endowed in gas. We are much more of a gas country. So utilizing this gas incentives will also affect that. The year also I mentioned even of carbon tax consideration. Yes, there's a proposal for environmental tax, including carbon tax and emission intensity tax. We need to find a way in EITI for Neiti. For reporting this, we try to report it based on companies' unilateral disclosure. But this will come away, these taxes, if reported properly, under the EITI listing, where EITI ought to report on this and we determine if the right taxes are even paid. And this is what's under EITI standard. This is something that's also very important for us. And like removal of subsidy policy for 2023, yes, oil and gas subsidy has been removed for oil and gas, but I think for us, subsidy removal and utilization and monitoring of the subsidy removal is very, very critical. How can this promote the utilization? Is that we need to also have a way of encouraging the underutilization of the oil and gas, especially petroleum, PMS, by encouraging the importation or in-country development of electrical vehicles. Custom duty for EVs is about 0 to 5% based on this act. While we have some countries that are having 0% for development of importation of electrical vehicles, EVs and their components. I think these are variable options that we need to take to look at that. And we also look at the issue of lack of fiscal, we need to look at incentives for clean energy investments. We need to have a much more robust and clear development for clean energy investment. Companies are trying to push investment into cleaner energy in their production. I think that should be incentives should be given where it should be 100% supported by government. Because if incentives are given in that way, it also decreases the demand for fossil fuel-driven energy on our national grid if these are encouraged. In a nutshell, energy transition is one of the key components of EITI implementation, whereby we need to start planning for energy transition because we already have a set of targets already established, and already the whole trajectory is that we are moving towards energy transition. And we also need to have incentives for stranded assets. If we leave energy transition, what is the implication of our assets that we have on that energy, like our oil we have underground, and also the other energy sources? We look at the situation where we have of Enugu coal mines in those days when it was moved, when coal mine became unfashionable and now they are left with ghost stranded assets. We also need to find a way of having that incentive taken care of. And the people that are dependent on oil and gas revenue, especially those in the Niger Delta, how mechanism do we have in place for them to transit from oil-based economy or oil-based income to a cleaner environment? We need to start developing that resilience for this community, based people, for them to have that achievement. And I think for us under the EITF, there are so many things that we can be able to. This is the direction that we're thinking, and also we're trying to see how this can be implemented under the tripod of government, civil society, and the companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bassi. You have raised lots of issues where not issues possible. We call them gaps, that any reform, that would really be holistic should address respect to incentivizing a just and resilient energy transition. That is what I hear you say. We're able to distill the details of what you have said. But I see that Dr. Honorable Ugbor is back on the call. I would invite him to anchor on his thoughts and also just take this question, as he anchors on that thought, because I think he was already also speaking around possible gaps, that the law may not have addressed, that the bills may not have addressed, but he is a legislator, there are lawmakers making the laws, and I'm sure he has more familiarity on those bills, perhaps than many of us on this call, so he was talking about green taxation, but what are the other, possible gaps that these reforms appear to have either papered over or not given adequate attention? We realize that, of course, a law is not perfect. It can always be amended, improved upon. There seems to be a consensus that let's pass these bills, and then we can always make amendments as we go forward. So the question is, if we do pass these bills, like the House of Reps has already passed them, the Senate passes and they become law, what would be those critical gaps that you think we need to pay attention to in the next 12 months, 24 months, and see how to harness the benefits of not just the transition, but also the current resource endowments, and to improve or increase the resilience of our people for beneficiation purposes? Honorable Ugbor, please, if you heard me.
Yes, thank you very much, and my apologies for the break in transmission. I was listening to everybody speak very well, but when I started speaking, all of a sudden, so technology can sometimes do that. Well, so in terms of what you just asked, yes, the current tax reform bills do not explicitly spell out incentives for renewable energy adoption in terms of green tax and how investments can be driven towards renewable energy adoption in the country. But through the instrumentality of regulations that have been designed by other of governments like NESRIA, like the National Automotive Council, and a few other organizations which I am privileged to be close to and to also regulate as a member of parliament. We've seen the move towards designing incentives for adoption of cleaner environmental practices in our entire industrial processes. So, for example, NESRIA has designed policies that create some kind of environmental tax and levies on industries and companies that produce goods and services in the country. And the whole idea of this is to disincentivize environmental pollution, disincentivize CO2 emissions from these companies. And then, of course, we're talking about renewable energy, energy transition from fossil fuels to oil. And renewable energy in itself also has environmental issues like battery production that requires mining of lithium, of lead, and then it needs the recycling and disposal of renewable energy components, especially batteries that are considered a very hazardous material. And so there's been reforms to take care of some of these challenges that are not covered directly in the current tax reform bills. But there's room for those regulations to come in and to help to fill in these gaps. in the general context of our energy transition, integrating the carbon tax is very important. The ES mentioned it, that South Africa has done that already, and I'm aware that in Nigeria there's been moves towards designing a framework for carbon pricing and carbon trading in Nigeria. This is very important because this is one of the ways through which companies can key into to raise funding to support. There's much work that is being done. I want to say, generally speaking, that in process of our energy transition outlook, we have to be very, very careful that we don't, should I say, shoot ourselves in the foot. As it is now, the last speaker just mentioned that Nigeria is an oil-producing country. We still generate majority of our income from oil and gas. And so in the process of transitioning, how do we ensure that the workers who are currently employed in the fossil fuel industry, how do we improve their capacity? How do we retrain our workforce so that we don't end up putting a lot of people out of job in the process of transitioning to cleaner sources of energy? This is very important. And when we were in Dubai in 2 years ago at COP, we had a session focused largely on energy transition for workers. How do we ensure that the workers in the country who are largely employed in the fossil fuel industry are not left behind and are carried along in the new transition to renewable energy? So these are some of the things that as a parliament, we've debated some of these issues to be sure that we don't throw away the baby and the bathwater, and how we can carry the oil and gas sector themselves along. And so we've held a series of engagement with the oil and gas industry to see how they can be a part of this transition. They can support this transition through funding, and then, of course, the training and retraining of their own workers to move towards this cleaner energy that we're all anticipating in the country. So in summary, yes, the carbon, the green, the carbon, what was it called? The stock exchange, the green tax, which was proposed before, as I mentioned, is also still there. We're still pushing. It should be reintroduced so that companies who pollute the most are charged the green tax, and this green tax is channeled towards investment in renewable energy and infrastructure for renewable energy. And I hope that as soon as these tax bills are passed, we can sit down again and look at areas where we can then design regulations and policies that can help to fill in these gaps and can help achieve the purpose for which we're working towards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Bob, for that perspective. There are models of legislations that enable, facilitates, and enable the energy transition, while of course also being mindful of current energy sources, all of course in the move to ensure energy security for countries. Some of these have been mentioned: South Africa, Netherlands. I would mention the United States of America, until the recent rollbacks that we have seen in the last 100 days or so. I mean, a reference have been made to the Inflation Reduction Act, which, is a combination of both fiscal, monetary, and energy initiatives, to ensure that the country not just retains a leadership position in climate change, but also maximize the energy transition potentials of that country. Very interesting piece of legislation, but of course all of that now is up in the air because of the recent developments in that country. Let me come to the National Council of Climate Change. Awele, thank you for being there, for being patient with us. From what you have seen, what you have read, and your understanding of the current fiscal reforms around the tax base specifically, what provisions in the countries in our National Climate Change Acts, the Nigeria Climate Change Act, when it was enacted in 2021, the council was set up, I think, the year after or 2 years after. So what are the issues what are the provisions in the Climate Change Act, that ongoing fiscal reforms needs to be really mindful of, just in case they have not been taken into account, that require a lot more emphasis. I will over to you, please.
All right, thank you very much for inviting the National Council on Climate Change Secretariat. I have to stress it. We have the Secretariat, so it's NCCCS, really. So thank you for your question. So to just go forward, I will just say that Section 4 of our Act, which I'll just permit me to just read briefly, states that, right. Okay, particularly Section 4I, it says that we can collaborate with the Federal Inland Revenue Service to develop mechanism for carbon tax in Nigeria. And I think one of the key aspects in response to your question is us developing the carbon tax. A lot has been said about the carbon markets, carbon tax, and its framework and all of that. And one of the things that should be considered under our fiscal regulation should be the mechanism for carbon tax in Nigeria. Why is this important for it to be included? Because we are talking about taxation. Yes, carbon tax, the implication is that people will be taxed based on the emission and greenhouse gas emission and all of that. So if it's included, that should be an aspect that the fiscal policies and regulations in Nigeria should look into. And a lot has been said about the bills. The bills, yes, to me, they do not fully capture, and the Honorable has said, and previous speakers have said, they do not really capture the renewable energy as it were. Of course, there's an aspect that says under the VAT that electric cars and some aspects of renewable energy should be exempted and all of that. But the first thing I would consider is us having a carbon tax infused into the relevant laws applicable in Nigeria. So with that we can start from there. Then we also have Section 22. What does Section 22 really talk about? Section 22 really talks about the fact that budgetary allocations or budgets allocations should be made for climate change matters. Look at Section 22 of our Act, which say that, especially Section 22 sub 3, it said that the ministry responsible for finance, budget, and national planning shall ensure that all budget proposals submitted by MDAs have been properly vetted and costed for climate change considerations, and that adequate allocation is provided for them under appropriate surplus in the annual budget. Also, we're talking about fiscal policies and regulation, and this is also part of fiscal policies and regulation. If all ministry, departments, and agencies begin to consider the fact that when we are preparing our budgetary allocations, we should include issues on climate change, that will be very, very helpful, as that will now enable people to know, oh, fine, we have to include this. And as soon as the carbon tax comes, somebody has said earlier here that we now reinvest it into renewable energy. So this is also a portion of the law that, to me, under the Climate Change Act, that should be considered. Then you also go to Section 19 of the Act. It talks about the carbon budget and national climate change action plan. It's Section 19 sub A said that sets carbon budget for Nigeria to keep average increases in global temperature within 2 degrees centigrade and pursue efforts to eliminate the temperature increase. So I'm looking at it from having really a major carbon market platform, because when you have a carbon market platform, now we've talked about setting carbon budget. This carbon budget we are talking about is different from including of climate change matters in our budget. But then we're going to set it. Once you set it up, then fiscal regulations will not go in line with the provision under the Act. So to me, carbon market is one of the major aspects that we have to look at if we want to involve under our Act on fiscal policies under the laws that we are examining. Because with the carbon market, if it operates, or because we have started developing it, the Honorable mentioned earlier that there's something on carbon market. Of course, the NCCCS has also engaged in carbon market activation plan and policies, and we've carried out stakeholders engagement on this. So I think the carbon market should be one of the key points of fiscal reforms under the Climate Change Act. So I'm looking at carbon market. I hope I've been able to answer your questions. Carbon tax and carbon markets. Thank you.
Absolutely, great responses, carbon tax, carbon markets. The fact that you refer to specific sections of the Nigeria Climate Change Act is very interesting. It's a new law, 2021. Implementation is just underway. But if you don't mind, you're talking about collaboration with agencies, and you specifically mentioned the Inland Revenue Service, Federal Inland Revenue Service. Is there some form of interface already ongoing between the council, the secretariat, and that agency in respect to these taxes that you have mentioned, even if it's just peripheral interfaces yet?
Yes, of course. Remember the session of the art I mentioned, so that we have to collaborate with Federal Inland Revenue. And I think sometime last year, yes, if you look at, there's an existing, I believe we are aware there's an existing carbon market plan, activation plan. There's also carbon market activation policy out there. And this was done together jointly with the Federal Inland Revenue Service, and we produced a document. And that document is out there, and we've had a stakeholder engagement. So there's a collaboration ongoing between the Federal Inland Revenue Service and the NCCCS to ensure that the carbon markets comes to fruition. And there's a working document to that effect, jointly prepared by the NCCCS and the FRS to ensure the carbon markets regime is triggered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Awele. Let me come to Olumide. So we go around the entire panel of speakers. From your experience in working with young people, who to a large extent belong to the cluster we call GESI, gender inclusion, gender equality, and social inclusion. That's the language in our world of development practice. Taxes, when you hear taxes, you begin to think of more bills. People already had pressed. How do you explain, how do you relate these, the benefits specifically or especially, to young people, to the generality of people who already feel marginalized, already feel hard pressed, already feel excluded? What does all of this mean to young people generally, and people who are hard to reach? Olumide.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly?
Very well, please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me first of all start by saying that, to actually truly align with Nigerian national energy transition ambition, I think tax reform must actually prioritize renewable energy investments. And we also need to look at how we can phase out incentive for fossil fuels, because this is what is killing the organogram or the structure of building a formidable renewable energy sector in the country, and also addressing the gaps that we currently have in this sort of proposal. But when you look at the role of young people, as we know, actually play a very vital role in developing and building a just and inclusive transition. And building inclusive transition, it means that we are primarily focusing through advocacy and innovation. And with a unique perspective on the challenge posed by climate change and energy inequality, you can see that youths, what they do is to do what? To mobilize communities, to raise awareness, and to drive demand for sustainable practices. So this often actually allow young people to to understand the latest technology, which one of them is social media, which allows them to effectively communicate their visions for greener future. But when you see the upcoming young people that are into business, or people that want to even tap into the renewable energy sector, you notice that the economy we have presently is not conducive for them to even explore, or even to say, okay, when we're talking about tax, how is it going to help them to grow their businesses? And the demographic is not only vocal about their needs, but also actively participate in grassroots movements. That is what the young people will be thinking about. And also, how do we also see our young people pushing for policies that prioritize renewable energy, energy efficiency, and even social justice? Because the young people you see today are angry for where to stay, what to eat, and what to wear. That is what is actually being the problem. And we cannot continue to see ourselves if we want to engage by leading a meaningful engagement between policymakers, industrial leaders, and even communities. We need to start seeing how we can ensure that there's a transition that is sustainable energy source, considering the needs and the rights of all stakeholders. Because every action you take, every movement you make, young people have to be part of it. So if you make it or you ensure that this transition from sustainable energy source and you consider the need and the right for all stakeholders, then there's going to be a wrap. Moreover, let me say that youth can also look at contributing to the energy transition by looking at innovation and entrepreneurship in the clean energy sector. And that is one of the biggest, because we talk about investment opportunity. When we talk about building more collaboration, investment opportunity for young people helps them to foster innovation and entrepreneurship into the so-called clean, what they call it, clean energy sector. So many young individuals actually are trying to see how they can pursue education, careers in science, technology, let me use the word STEM, so that it can help them to equip themselves with the skill that is necessary to develop a cutting edge in this in all call, whether it's tax reform or moving from renewable, from fossil fuel to renewable energy. So it is very, very important that we need to start looking at how we young people, or how the young people, or how the young government can engage young people in research, starting from how they can see green businesses, think about green businesses, how they can start developing community initiatives that turn talks into reality, that turn talks into implementation, that can create job opportunities and promote economic resilience, whether in the community they find themselves or in every aspect of the sector they find themselves. So there's a lot of youth lead initiative that that can ensure that we can marginalize voices, or prioritize in a transition process. Because if we don't inculcate or we don't make sure that young people are part of this transition, then who is going to be the beneficiary? Because they say when two elephants are fighting, it's the grass that suffers. So as the challenge may be, we need to start looking at what are the transitional norms and advocate for systematic change so that young people can catalyze a more equitable and a sustainable future for themselves. And by addressing this, then we now talk about how we can make concern, but also the social disparity. So for me, I think it is very important that Nigeria's ambition for energy transition is commendable, fine. Yet, we see that the tax reform appears to be, to favor traditional energy sectors, rather in highlighting the, contradiction between the government's green aspiration and its fiscal policy. So we need to start looking at how do we move faster from fossil fuel to renewable energy so that young people can find themselves in whereby businesses will be very easy for them to work or to do, and everybody will be accountable for the environment in find themselves or themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olumide. I'll stay with you for a minute
Okay.
because I like your train of thought around innovation and entrepreneurship that young people should be encouraged to get involved with. And I know that a key benefit of the transition, the energy transition, is to unlock, as innovations, both in the core energy sector and, of course, in the transition elements of it. But the young people in Nigeria are very interesting lot. We have very versatile, productive set on one hand. On the other hand, of course, we have those who are a lot more concerned about things that are of less subliminal value. So the question is, how do we bridge that gap? How do we, harness the very productive, profitable and versatile creative energies of the Nigerian youth? How do we take this message to them? I mean, because you speak and you, of course, an elite when you speak, but there are many of others like you, like us, who want to hear these things, who want to know these things and get involved. So what should the law, what should the reforms take into account in getting the message, the understanding, the awareness to this mass of young people, vibrant energy that can do wonders, to make them see the benefits and get involved? Or do you think that's the sufficient awareness and sensitization and incentivization?
Yeah, thank you very much. I will not stay long on this because, in every aspect of the conversation of renewable energy or conversation of fossil fuel. Like I said, we are at the receiving end. We are the one that suffer the brunt. Like I said, when two elements are fighting, is the grass that suffers. But the bottom line is, how do we create an enabling environment? Because not every one of us in Nigeria, the young people in Nigeria, that actually have the understanding of the so-called fossil fuel. They have the understanding of the so-called renewable energy. But when it comes to the transition, we need to start looking at how do we localize this conversation? How can our local governments, how can our councillors in our districts start looking at small actions that turn to big impacts? It's very important that there must be an activity. We must ensure a reform that can promote local, incentive, local opportunities, local entrepreneurs, local informed channels that can help young people to understand the clean energy solution. Because most of them, they need to understand this in their local language for them to be able to, even express their own way of adding values to the economy. Because most of them doesn't really have the opportunity to get the education. Like I said, investment in research, investment in career, investment in opportunities that can drive local action from bottom top is what the young people need presently. And we need to start promoting, we need to start localizing clean energy solutions through effective physical reforms. These are the things that when it is done and when it's done to localizing them, then we need to take along both the people that doesn't even have understanding, the people that well knowledge about it, and the people that will be making use of this opportunity. So it's a little bit of how do we turn all this paperwork into implementation? How do we make sure that when young people see policy reform, when young people see tax reform, when young people see energy transition, they think about how they will make more investment in their local community and get involved and also make money back for themselves and turn it back to the economy. That is the only way. Let me just ask on this call, just for a general call. How many young people in Nigeria are paying tax? How many of us are actually even know how to calculate or how to understand is one or two tax? It's a dicey way whereby a lot of young people don't even have knowledge. So knowledge transfer, the gap is very wide. Not to talk of investing in the young people, not to talk of young people turning that investment to opportunity, and not to talk of them putting it back into the economy for the economy to grow. So transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy takes a lot of understanding, a lot of knowledge, a lot of opportunity, and local authorities need to also pay attention to what the kind of conversation, the kind of opportunity they are giving to young people when it comes to tapping into jobs, tapping into renewable energy, so that they will see it as an opportunity that benefits them, their household, and can turn them to somebody in life for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olumide. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen on the call, we are very, very grateful for your keen attention. We will open up for audience participation shortly. I just want to give you that heads up. We would ask you to unmute to indicate by a raise of your hand. And of course, we would invite you to speak. But I have also had mentioned that if you have something really keen that you want to make a point on, you can use the chat box, for your questions, of course, as well. But we'll just take another round with the speakers and then we'll come to audience participation. And this will be quick, I promise you. Honorable Ugbor, you have heard from the conversations that, Nigeria's federal structure, we have the exclusive and the concurrent and residual lists. Some of these issues that we spoke about would also, of course, cascade down to the concurrent, and residual list taxation, lots of taxes, at the, subnational level, especially local government level, where, every day's tax. You drive your car 1 mile, you pay one tax. You drive another 2 miles, you pay another tax. So we suppose that the reforms may not address all of these issues, but with respect to this conversation, how do we ensure, how do we move this conversation, drive these ambitions and these objectives to the subnational levels? Because, I mean, they need revenues as well. They also need to run the states and local councils, but they also need to transit. They also need to join the movement on energy transition. So how do we strike this balance? Does legislation suffice, intergovernmental relations? Just how? What are your thoughts, Honorable Ugbor?
Yes, I think this is a very important question, and it's one of the issues that we pondered upon very deeply, especially for me from Benue State. As you know, part of the reforms that this tax reform seeks to drive home is the VAT, the VAT, and certain goods and services were removed from from the VAT, especially food, for example. And so, for a state like Benue, using that as an example, that is a mainly agrarian state that produces food, mainly that is unprocessed and is bought and sold directly from the farms to the markets, to the open markets, and then is taken out of the state. How do we benefit from the tax reforms, from the VAT, since our food production and sales is not value added? There's relatively no value. It's from the farm and it's sold straight out of the states. So this and many other examples are some of the things that state governments need to sit down and ponder deeply about, on how they can take advantage of the new tax reforms and how they can design their own local taxes through their own local laws and ensure that they are in compliance and in tune with what is happening at the federal level. There are certain taxes that have direct impact on the states and local government have direct responsibility. I should mention the concurrent list, like waste management, for example, environmental. Local governments have the primary responsibility to collect local taxes for waste collection, for cleaning up the environment and things like that, things to do with local pollution, production of local, goods and services at the local level, and how do the local governments collect these taxes in a way that does not create a double taxation scenario for the people who live within these communities. So these are some of the areas that states really need to dig into and to see how they can reform their own local tax systems to reflect the vision of the federal government. And I'm sure that many states are looking into this. You'll remember the debate about alcohol in the north. And the issues around them. Should states in the north who have banned alcohol benefit from VAT on alcohol? And then other areas like that too. Oil and gas states also have issues regarding the derivation and how this derivation affects them, who gets what, who gets more, what do states get, and the rest. Eventually, we settled for a 50-30-20 model, where 50% is shared based on derivation, 30% on population, or 30% on population, and 20% on something else. So these are the kind of things that states need to really look into. We expect that a lot of tax consultancies should be dusting up their books now and recommending to state governments how they can design their own local laws at the state and local government, so that they can reap the full benefits of this tax reform that has come to stay.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ugbor. Let me come to you, Dr. Bassi, and this question is straightforward. From your interactions and understanding in the sector, and in anticipation of the reforms becoming law, what role do you think Neiti should be playing or should play in monitoring the implications, the fiscal implications of the reforms as they relate to the energy transition, our ambitions and targets?
Thank you very much. Thank you. For us to monitor the implementation, we have various mechanisms of doing that. We can, through our reports, look at how the implementation of the tax reform, especially as it affects the energy transition. Already there are targets set for energy transition for us to achieve. To our yearly or our Neiti reporting mechanism. We'll report on that, a chapter on that, to look at how effective that has been. Also, through occasional papers that we produce, we look at the effectiveness of this tax reform, especially its implementation. One of the good things about the tax reform is that it also tries to harmonize the tax into one collecting agency. So the issue of double taxation goes off the chart because there is one revenue collection agency which can be monitored in terms of the taxes from the extractive sector. Also, the mechanism whereby within the reform itself, the tax reform, there's a mechanism whereby the 3 tiers of government will sit down and also have one common policy of tax implementation. So it gives a monitoring mechanism. Monitoring becomes easier for us in terms of reporting. Whereas before you have certain state governments having different legislation, especially as it covers the environmental reporting. One will say they are also reporting for dust usage. One company will come 3. There are a lot of companies reporting about this double taxation or multiple taxation across the tiers of government, but reporting becomes easier. I think for us is that we need to look at this. The testing for this reporting body is that how the implementation pans out, because if this reforms comes into play, the tax bill comes into play, and the implementation comes into play, there needs to be a way of monitoring the implementation and the effectiveness of that. And one of the best ways of doing that is through the EITI process, because it already has the 3 components of people that are directly impacted by that, especially for the extractives. We have the companies, government and civil society looking at the impact, because this tax reform will also impact communities directly. It has a certain impact on communities. It also has an impact on company operations, and especially companies operating in the extractive sector, oil and gas sector, because there are going to be new taxation of new ways of reporting. And also for us in EITI, reporting the tax, we need to have a way of even monitoring the carbon reporting, have mechanisms for reporting carbon we will have a conversation about carbon reporting and how this is being reported and how it's being implemented in companies and how this implementation is being taken into place. For us, it's an opportunity which EITI can exploit to its maximum when it comes into play. And one of these mechanisms of doing this is by having this webinar series where we have different stakeholder views and harmonizing their views into how it can be implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bassi. And it's very important that to note that the FIRS, which when the bill becomes law, will be the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, is a member of the Neiti board. Am I correct with that? So there's already that interface, and so we can't agree anymore that the EITI framework presents a very useful mechanism to track the implementation of these fiscal reforms around the energy sector and the transition when they become law. Let me come to you, Awele, from your perspective, a similar kind of question, to Dr. Bassi, what role should the NCCC now you said we should add secretariat, forgive us for that, play in monitoring the fiscal implementation of these reforms as they relate to the energy transition? Hello, Awele.
Sorry. Yes, now, so we can engage in supervisory and monitoring role. Remember, we are a regulatory agency, so we have functions to supervise, monitor, and regulate. How do we do this? In supervising and monitoring the whole aspect of renewable energy in the tax bill and all of that to ensure implementation of the tax bill. Particularly this as the VAT waiver on electronic cars and other renewables have been listed in the bill, we have to ensure that it is thoroughly monitored. Then also on our regulatory role, we have to ensure true carbon market regime. The reason I'm mentioning this carbon market regime because it is very, very important. And currently the NCCC is working towards having a regulation on the carbon market. So we can do this regulation through carbon market regime to ensure that projects that qualify for carbon credits are registered and able to collect the taxes and remit it back into the renewable energy industry. So we also make a case for the inclusion. Of course, we have now discovered that there are gaps in the law. So as part of policymakers, we can also make case for the inclusion of renewable energy exemption into the whole fiscal law process. Then lastly, we can also use as form of policy feedback to the Ministry of Finance. I failed to mention it earlier. The Ministry of Finance is also critical in developing carbon emissions trading system and the carbon market. So we have to also give policy feedback to the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning on the impact of this fiscal bill, whether it actually undermines energy transition process or promotes same. And when this policy feedback will also serve as a way of assessing fiscal policies in Nigerian renewable energy sector. So we have a supervisory role, monitoring role to play, and regulatory role to play. At the end of the day, our interest is to ensure that we're able to meet net zero, because that is what our function basically, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And how can this be done? It has for it to be achievable. The fiscal laws have to also consider those in renewable energy sector. I think these are some of the roles that NCCS can play. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please do show some love to our distinguished panel of speakers. Please pop up your thumbs, and all of that. Put your hands together, put a clap if you can. It's been a wonderful session listening to them. And I believe you will agree with me that they've added lots of value to the conversation. We know that we can, of course, not explore, the full extent of these conversations in 90 minutes. That's not possible. And the essence of the Rembinar series, dialogue series, is to keep engaging on these issues, not just around the tax base, the tax reforms, and the extractive sector, but around the general public finance management, to push for transparency, of course, and accountability, which is what we're heavy on at Orderpaper. So thank you to our distinguished panel of speakers. Now we come to you, our dear audience. You have been wonderful. You have listened very keenly. You have made contributions. I can see questions on the chat box. So may I invite that if you have a question, just indicate by a raise of your hand. I think that we'll be able to call you to speak if you are on mute and speak, but you have to make it really brief, as much as possible. While we're waiting for those to come up, let me read a question or two from the chat box. Young people, this is from Philip Jackball. Young people will ask what the taxes they have been paying in other areas have been used for before introducing new ones. When we even talk of new taxes, before we even talk of new taxes, no matter how laudable the goals are. So the question is, why ask to pay more when you cannot account, convincingly for what you have paid for? That is what Philip, I believe, is asking. Honorable Ugbor, you want to take that? Quickly, sir.
Yes, well, I think the tax reform bills doesn't seek to increase the burden of tax on our citizens. It seeks to streamline the tax regime. It seeks to reduce the incidence of double taxation and over-taxation on the people. It also seeks to reduce the tax on the poorest of the poor in our society. So I think there are provisions that give certain ranges. If you're not earning more than 50 million for a company, you don't pay tax. If you're not earning up to, I think, 2 or 3 million or something like that per annum for an individual, you're tax exempt. So I think the tax reform is really seeks to look into the burden of tax on our people, especially the lower income people, and provide some tax relief on them. So don't worry, my brother, young people will not be overburdened by tax, but rather to streamline your tax regime and, of course, help you to monitor your tax more efficiently. And this time around, I think we can track where our tax revenue funds will be going to.
Tracking where those revenues received will be going to is very important. And this is where we invite citizen vigilance and participation in governance. That is all the work that we do at Orderpaper seek to achieve, to empower citizens to be able to understand the governance process, not just within the legislative realm, and be able to use that understanding to demand accountability from state actors, especially those who have a mandate by elections. Kelechi has a question. Please do raise your hand if you want to make a question. We would call you, ask you to unmute and speak. But this is from Kelechi. He says that the Niger Delta has paid the environmental price for Nigeria's oil wealth. How can energy transition and tax reforms accommodate the Niger Delta? Dr. Bassi may have spoken to this in passing, but let me invite him if he wants to, expatiate for that. Dr. Bassi, to that question, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, there are so many mechanisms towards the problem of the Niger Delta. The new tax bill, like the Honorable said, is not to introduce the taxes, but to consolidate the taxes. Under the PIA, there's the host community trust fund, which is supposed to take care of host community in the Niger Delta. And there are other funding mechanisms that is still active. The Niger Delta Development Fund. Of recent, we have the other initiatives also. So what I'm saying is that monitoring of this mechanism already on ground is something that we need to deepen in terms of the implementation of this the reclamation or development of the Niger Delta. But what I'm also saying is that in the aspect of energy transition, there's also need to be a base for, if we're transiting from energy, whereby it's oil-based energy that we're talking about, the energy transition, we're moving away from the oil and gas, from the oil sector. There's also we need to have a mechanism in place whereby the Niger Delta that is heavily dependent on the oil and gas sector will also have an alternative. And I think it can be through regulation or through other mechanism, whereby a certain percentage of this revenue from the green energy fund can be directed to the Niger Delta to source for alternative source of revenue, livelihood for them, not just for the development, but livelihood is very, very critical. And I think something of interest is that, like the report Neiti is working on with the Ford Foundation, we're trying to also look at that. What's going to be the effect of the energy transition on Niger Delta and some of these dependent communities on that. And let's see how the recommendation that will come from that report, and we can see how we can be able to also have more conversation around that and see how it can be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bassi. Kelechi, that's a challenge to you. Let's look out for that report when it is ready. We would be glad, of course, to let you know at Orderpaper and engage with that report. There is Timile who's got a hand or his hand raised up. Can you unmute and make your question or comments? Sorry, ask your question or make your comment very quickly, please. Timile, you have your hand raised up, except you have changed your mind about your question or contribution. You can unmute and speak. Okay, and it does seem like that's this person to me is not speaking. There's a question and it appears to be similar to what has been addressed by Innocent, but I would ask it all the same. What inclusive strategy is put in place to control the impact of the tax bill on transitional and energy transition, looking at the negative impact this could pose on youth, women, and children in Nigeria? It may have been answered, but let me ask Olumide to just quickly weigh in on this in a minute before we take your concluding remarks on the panel.
Yeah, yeah, thank you very much. I think I've mentioned there are a lot of, I think one of the big strategy that we need to start looking at is one of my brother just asked a question, which I wanted to reflect on what tax do we actually have on ground before? And how do we make sure that the one that we are going to be talking about now is not going to affect the production or the activities of young people? because when you look at the energy transition itself, it has given Nigeria a very good platform for us to excel from moving from fossil to renewable energy. But how do we make sure that the role of young people will not be left out in implementing and also be part of the implementing strategy that's going to be working? So I think it is very important for us to start looking at how can we prioritize environmental restoration for young people to strive for their businesses, for their innovation, so that local investments can help us to heal the so-called wound that is inflicting our land and not making young people, to excel in doing businesses. I think if that can be put in place, then we can have a proper and a safer land to make people and young people excel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olumide. So let me, on that basis, stay with you to make your final or concluding remarks. We have 5 minutes out of time already. We wanted to keep this within 90 minutes, but we're very grateful for the way we have been able to manage time so far. So Olumide, just in a minute, what do you think should be done to future-proof? And this is a question for every other panel speaker. What should Nigeria do to future-proof our renewable energy potentials, and climate change ambitions, fulfillment of climate change or achievement of our climate change ambitions? Of course, in the face of current global headwinds, you know what's going on with from America these days, and what's that, of course, is influencing other countries and jurisdictions to act. We see what Argentina is trying to do, the rollbacks here and there. So, but how do we, future-proof our renewable energy potentials, in the face of all of this, Olumide?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think for me, we need to start looking at how we can foster, let me say, the public-private partnership so that we can that can help us to enhance regulatory frameworks and even empowering local communities to innovate and lead transition towards a future that we are looking for Nigeria. And we also need to look at how can we diversify energy sources and also integrate climate policy into the national development plan, because this is the only way we can drive, we can build, and we can sustain the future. And the economy can be able to, build on the climate ambition and the promise we have for the economy so that we can build resilience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Olumide. Let me come to Honorable Ugbor, but I would like you to also weave this into your final remark. There's a question by Chidia Bassi who's asked this specifically, what I consider interesting question. Earmarked taxes, he says, has not been used optimally in Nigeria's example, in Nigeria. And he gave an example of the education tax. How will the green tax being proposed or you talk about be monitored so that it achieves the purpose of building infrastructure for clean energy? So you can weave that into your final remark if you want to take the last question I mentioned as well, sir.
Okay. Well, across the world, governments are developing and enacting tax policies designed to encourage companies and individuals support a just transition to lower carbon economy. Tax policy tools usually are designed to create economic value for environmental pollutions, emissions, such like carbon pricing, carbon taxes, greenhouse gas emissions, and things like that. The overall agenda here is to ensure that as individuals and as a country and as companies operating in Nigeria, we adopt better practices, better environmental sustainability models that help to ensure that we reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our country and we transition in a just and fair way to a cleaner and more sustainable future. I think that overall, the current tax reforms we have proposed in Nigeria seek to do just that. We are hopeful that the reforms will take into account the wide spectrum of our population, including the young people who are anxious of what the future holds through these tax reforms. One thing I know is that the tax reforms will increase the national cake. It will help improve the collection of taxes in Nigeria. It will help reduce the incidence of multiple taxation, and this will also drive investment and investors into our country. So it seeks to serve several purposes at the same time and kill several birds with one stone. So overall, I am hopeful that the tax reforms are quite comprehensive. They may not have gone into detail into issues of green taxation, into green bonds, and the likes, but these are things that can be easily cured through regulation, through policy frameworks. So with that being said, I think we're on the right track, and I look forward to the country improving its overall tax collection rates, improving its budgetary, its annual budgets, so that more problems can be solved, more infrastructure can be built, and of course, infrastructure and renewable energy can be expanded so that Nigeria progressively moves towards a cleaner and greener society. Thank you very much, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Honorable, for breaking that very succinctly in your final remarks. There will be more cake to share, meaning that there'll be more cake to eat. And we hope that it will not be a case of, Maria Antoinette, give them cake when they are looking for bread, which is a very critical aspect of the conversation that, of course, has resonated in the room today. Awele, what are your final thoughts? If you want to anchor that around how Nigeria can future-proof our renewable energy potentials and climate change ambitions in the face of current global headwinds.
Thank you very much. As you know, renewable energy is critical to reducing greenhouse gas emission and having a cleaner energy, cooking and all of that. However, there's one critical aspect I want us to look into. We've been talking about renewable energy. Have we asked ourselves, do we have legal framework to support the establishment or existence of renewable energy in Nigeria? I think not. We've all mentioned policies, guidelines, and all of that. But these are soft laws that are not really binding. So if we want to even start to even say, okay, let's include this in our fiscal laws. First of all, we have to talk about how do we get them on board. We need legal framework to be able to get them on board, or we have existing regulations and all of that. Can we harmonize them into one piece of legislation? I think that is where we should start from. Of course, the Climate Change Act is there. It has stated that reduction of greenhouse gas emission, adaptation, carbon markets, and all of that. But for renewable energy to strive in Nigeria, I believe we need a proper legal framework that will bring all of them together under an umbrella. And from there, we'll be able to have a good front. Thank you very much.
Yes, multiplicity of laws here and there, bits and pieces, you advocate for a consolidation into a single legal regulatory framework, if that's what I hear you say. Maybe something like we have in the United States until recently, the IRR, Inflation Reductions Act, which is one comprehensive, legislation that's, addresses the country's energy transition needs and ambitions. Thank you, Awele, for that. Dr. Bassi, your final thoughts, and if you also want to anchor around that question of how do we future-proof our renewable energy potentials.
Yeah, thank you, okay. My final thought here is Nigeria faces a delicate balancing act. We're trying to maximize revenue to fund development, but we're also trying to incentivize low carbon growth to meet our 2060 net zero target. Striking a balance requires smart fiscal policy that avoids shifting green investment while also ensuring sustainable government income. This is very critical because Nigeria depends heavily on oil revenue, close to 80% of its export earnings, but also this conflicts with energy transition framework. So we need to find a balance here. And like all the speakers have said, in renewable energy, first we must even have energy sufficiency before we even think of renewable energy source. Striking this balance is that how do we provide incentives, looking at our natural resources here to develop renewable energy source. We've looked at our hydro, look at our high potential solar potential in terms of solar energy generation. How can we start having this the tax reform tries to provide incentives for the for energy transition or energy generation in country, but it requires a multi-stakeholder approach. Like the last speaker said, legal framework, but it needs to be across agencies. I think for this to achieve its aim is that we need to have a very, very high-level collaboration between all stakeholders to look at how we can be able to achieve our energy transition, our just energy transition. We need to also require that, because we need to have a just energy transition that will be unique to Nigeria, and how we can be able to sustain that transition. Using as gas as our transition mineral, yes. How can we achieve that? Where there's so many gas projects that's ongoing in the country, how have they fared? And we need to have a dialogue on how this has been fared and how that can be utilized. AKK is one, gas commercialization is two, and then there are other sort aspects of gas utilization. Like we said, we are much more of a gas nation. How can we harness our gas? LNG is very critical. We've seen how important it is. And even the conversion of gas, cars to using gas. Do we have enough facilities, infrastructure to sustain the gas, the conversion process? If you convert your vehicle, how can you get those readily available in your areas? If you are going for EVs, electrical vehicles, how can we sustain that production? These are things that we need to look at and also have that impact. And this comes at a cost. We need to determine this cost and how we can be able to mitigate even any associated costs that might come out of our transition. Under the EITI platform, this provides a very, very credible way of where the three stakeholders can come and sit down and also evaluate this transition and also monitor this implementation, because we need to monitor this implementation and see how we're going. And if there are things that we need to change or we need to readjust, especially as it affects our commitment towards attaining the net zero, we need to look at that critically, and it should be evidence-based, based on data and based on consensus for us to achieve a just energy transition for the country. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I love the way you put it about, we need to ensure energy sufficiency before we dwell a lot more on the transition. May I also add that it's not just sufficiency, but security. We need to guarantee our energy security, as we consider the move towards renewable energy. Otherwise, we may just be throwing the baby away with the bathwater. I think that's one key point that has resonated, throughout this conversation in the room. We must sincerely thank our speakers. A distinguished audience, you have been wonderful. We kindly request you to please fill in your feedback, share your feedback with us on how this meeting has been conducted. There is a form. It's a short form, I assure you. It won't take much of your time on the chat box. Please engage and let us know, because this is a dialogue series. The Rembinar dialogue series would have a sequel in another a couple of weeks, and we use, of course, the feedback that you provide to refine the way we deliver this series and ensure that there is improved outputs and outcomes for every stakeholder who continues to participate and who are showing interest and observing. So please do fill in the form, and we'll be grateful for your attention. We cannot thank enough our panel of speakers. They have been wonderful. They have provided very, useful insights and foresights, I should add, that will, of course, have laid the ground for several other conversations as we hope to embark on a new regime of fiscal governance in the country that will be anchored largely on taxes and the body responsible for collection and all of that. Honorable Terseer Ugbor, Deputy Chairman, House of Representatives Committee on the Environment, we thank you very much. Dr. Nkiruka Maduekwe, the Director General of the National Council on Climate Change Secretariat, who has been very well ably represented by the head of Liga of the Secretariat, Awele Ikobi Anyali. Dr. Dita Bassi, Director of Policy Planning and Strategy of Neiti. Mr. Olumide Idowu, Founder ED of the ICCDI. You have been wonderful as our panel of speakers. Thank you very much. And please, our audience, please do appreciate with a clap, a virtual clap. For every one of you who have attended, we invite you to keep on the watch for the next episode. I will be letting you know shortly. We continue to engage the series on tax reforms because this is what is going to drastically alter public finance management in the coming weeks, coming months, probably coming years. And so the series on the tax reforms will continue to engage us in the Rembinar dialogue series. We invite you also to, of course, follow through on what is going on with your legislators. Check with them. Honorable Ugbor has discharged himself very creditably in this meeting. I have mentioned earlier that it's one of the more intellectual, intentional lawmaker in the 10th House of Representatives. Follow through with your lawmakers to ensure that they are giving you excellent representation, to ensure that they are promoting your interest and they are ensuring that, the economy is not further hard pressed to keep you, so disempowered that you can't ask questions. We provide you the platforms, we provide you all of the information that you need, the data at Orderpaper, using data and technology to inform you of what's going on in the National Assembly and the policy ecosystem generally. So follow us on X, Facebook, on Instagram at Orderpaper, on Instagram and YouTube. We are all there. Follow up on our website, at orderpaper.ng. We would share with you the outputs and outcomes, as we have them from this series. That's why we, of course, invited you to share your contact detail with us, because we are trying to create a community of continual engagement on these reforms ongoing in our country. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this will be our call to action. Would like to sincerely express our appreciation to Neiti for their very strong collaboration in implementing the Rembinar series. We are, of course, looking forward to having more partners join up, as we move forward in this series. This is about it. We're almost on the 2-hour mark, but we are grateful that you have been patient. You have spent all of this time with us. You have been a fantastic audience. Thank you very much, and please have a great rest of the day, Monday, the 28th of April, and have yourself a great week as we look forward to transition into the month of May 2025. Thank you, and so pleased to have a great time. Bye for now.
Thank you.